The views and opinions expressed by the hosts of this podcast are those of the individual and not of any affiliated companies. Occasional adult language is used.
Welcome to the ShamTalk Podcast, the #1 Notre Dame athletics podcast in the world. Today, the guys talk about everything that went wrong against the Cardinals, the future of Coach Marcus Freeman, and what the college football playoff will look like this year. And now, from the Duncan Student Center, here's your host, Jake Miller.
An unfortunate, very unfortunate weekend for Irish fans as college football playoff hopes are erased for Notre Dame, but they got a big matchup, a matchup that still has some meaning, especially to get into New Year's Six bowl game this December. I want to welcome everybody to our program. Brett McLaughlin, Jake Miller coming at you again from South Bend. It was a bad loss, but what does it mean for Notre Dame and why did they lose?
Well, I would say bad loss, that's almost an understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to this game, you're 5-1, season is quite literally on the line. If you lose, you go home. And not only did Notre Dame lose, they were outplayed, outmatched, and were almost blown out.
I would say they totally were. I mean, Louisville, you go in there, it's a smaller stadium, mid-range, 60,000-seat ACC stadium, and 5 turnovers is unacceptable. And I think you got to start with Hartman. I mean, he didn't play well. 3 picks, 2 fumbles on the day for Hartman. It was very much the Hartman that we've seen in the past. The guy from Wake Forest who was prone to turnovers but had a lot of upside. Was this imminent all along, or did Freeman position him in a bad place?
I would say it's a tough question, but it boils down to coaching. I mean, Hartman had a QBR of 27.1. That is abysmal. 5 turnovers, 2 touchdowns, 254 yards, 58% completion percentage. It wasn't a great day for him. And we saw this previously when he played Louisville last year at Wake Forest. It was kind of deja vu for him. Wake Forest, number 10 at that time, goes in, gets blown out again by Louisville, happens again to him at Notre Dame. I would say, Hartman showed us a little more of what kind of player, what kind of quarterback he is. And I remember talking to one of my friends at the end of the game about what he showed us, and he showed us that he was a game manager. Yeah. He's not going to be one of those, Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, electric type of players to extend plays with his legs. We saw him do that against Duke. Was that a fluke? I don't know. Maybe. But obviously against Louisville, we did not have that electric factor.
Our good friend and colleague, J.J. Post, I think is really strongly believes that Hartman will be an NFL pick and a long-time NFL player, but as a backup. And as a backup because he is a game manager. He can go in there, he can hand the ball off, he can do those bullet passes short. But in the end, this guy clearly struggled with some good coverage to get those throws out when he needed to.
Yeah, and I would liken it to a situation that we're seeing with the New York Giants.
Yeah.
When the line isn't protecting the quarterback has to make decisions, and it really tells you the type of player that you're looking at. And with Sam Hartman, we see that he's not able to thrive in that high-pressure environment. So I think Hartman might end up – I could see him being a starter in the NFL, but I think it's a situation kind of area. He has to have the right situation around him, and he'll succeed. And we saw that in the first games of the season. But when, push comes to shove and he's forced outside of his comfort zone, that's when we see the mistakes.
Let's talk about the offensive line a little bit because they definitely did not help Sam Hartman. 5 sacks on the day for the line. And interestingly, Brett, first time this year the offensive line was actually rotating players during the game. Notre Dame has struggled at the guard position, but they're rotating people in and out, especially captain Joe Alt on the left side there. Rotating him out, a little bit of a strange decision. On the day, Blake Fisher particularly struggled. He had 2 penalties, and he was benched the last 2 series. Marcus Freeman did comment that at the end of the game, they held Fisher out due to a hand injury. But this is something that we haven't seen so far, is offensive line play so poor.
No, and just an interesting stat here. Going into this game, Notre Dame had 6 sacks the entire year. Coming out, they allowed 5 in that one game, so they're up to 11. So an absolute brutal performance by the offensive line. And I think it's a pretty interesting coaching decision, and I'm not going to comment on whether I agree with it or not, but I think it's an interesting decision when you're going into a ranked game at night, it's an important game, to try something new, but not only to try it, but to stick with it when you see that it's not working.
Yeah, and, I think this was a team that they could have made more in-game adjustments. If you want to read more about the defense, you can head over to the Observer for a column that I wrote. But it's a team that played a lot of man defense, and Louisville used all of the field. They used Notre Dame would be more effective if they could switch to more zone coverage, and they simply didn't. Al Golden and his guys stuck it out, tried playing man. Defense was not the problem here. They let up the points, but they could have made additional adjustments.
I would say that this game does not fall on the defense. If you're at a -4 turnover margin and you give up, 30 points, 33 points, there's not much more you can ask from them. I mean, even if you look at the time of possession wasn't as indicative of poor offensive play as you would think. But the matter of the fact is Louisville was getting the ball exactly where they wanted it, not giving our defensive guys, the defensive unit as a whole, a lot of room to work with. And I think they played well for what cards they were dealt. Obviously, an adjustment could that have made a difference? Maybe. But at the end of the day, if the offense isn't firing, you're just not going to win football games.
Yeah, and I think Joe Alt here, he played fine. And this is a guy who's going to continue to be one of the top picks, the top prospects in next year's draft. Bears GM was there to see, Joe Alt needs to step up and to be a huge leader, to be an advocate for that offensive line and try to make a coherent game plan going forward. But, it's not only the players in the field. This game, there was a significant impact that Marcus Freeman in the fourth quarter decides to go for it on 4th and 11 deep in Louisville, what would that be? Deep in
Notre Dame territory.
Yeah, deep in Notre Dame territory, exactly. I didn't understand it. In his post-game press conference, he said that he needed 2 scores, and he wasn't sure that Notre Dame was going to be able to get the ball back within that time. But still, that's a bold play call, and ultimately it affected the Irish poorly.
Yeah, I don't agree with that call at all. I think that was an incredibly poor decision because if you look at it, I'm a stats guy.
Yeah.
You look at the odds you convert on a 4th and 11 deep in your own territory, the way the offense has been playing up until that point are astronomically low. And we saw that. It was, he takes the timeout, they go on the field.
I thought they were just going to try to draw an offsides. No, it was legitimate.
But even when you think drawing the offsides, if you get to 4th and 6, do you then consider going for it? I would think punt because, as we saw, missing on that 4th and 11 is an almost assured Louisville score, which is exactly what happened.
Came around and got the field goal +6 there. Mm-hmm. I think something to consider is that very much this Irish team is very predictable on 3rd and 4th down situations. So far this year, from the passing game, there has been 18 first downs after a 3rd or a 4th down. 9 of those have been to Mitchell Evans. The other 9 have been to everybody else combined. So if you're a defense, double team, have your middle linebacker, have your safety, keep an eye on Evans. And I think that's what happened, is that what this team is going to do when they need more significant yardage. And Louisville was able to find it here. Yeah,
and I think the predictability of the offense is a huge problem. Because what it does is once you're able to predict what the offense is going to do, you can then take out Sam Hartman's 1st and 2nd option, forcing him to look further down the field to his 3rd option. You give him less time, you can apply the pressure, and then we saw the result, 5 turnovers out of him on the evening. As we wrap up our Louisville coverage, we got to talk about the run game because the run game has very much disappeared for the Irish. They started out strong, Audric Estime coming back for this season, so high expectations. But their running game seems to lack some sense of creativity. At Louisville, 44 rush yards, that's all for today. Our good friend Tyler Horka over at Blue Gold had a good tweet, a good stat. He says that from week 1 to 3 on first downs, Estime was first in all of FBS. And since week 4, Estime is 115th on first downs in the FBS. And he's still getting significant first down carries. But running the ball up the middle, it seems like these opposing defenses know what Estime is going to do. I would say that's part of it, and it just comes down to predictability. I mean, obviously, if you look at the teams that we played week 1 through 3, they're not the same caliber as weeks 4 through 6, right? You went from playing, Tennessee State, Central Michigan, NC State, to now 3 consecutive ranked matchups, all with very good defenses, astute defensive fronts who are going to pick up on these things. And when you go in there and you're planning on just doing the draw up the middle, it's not going to work. You have to be more creative. You have to adapt. And that's something that we haven't seen from this offense. They haven't had that adaptability or flexibility that you would expect. And as a playoff hopeful, you need.
Yeah, it's a deep running backs room. I mean, you're seeing a lot from Estime, but Payne and Price look solid as well. And I think it's difficult for Parker in the offensive squad here to say, how are we going to try to distribute these carries? Ford, obviously, in the Tennessee State game, went down with a concussion. He's seeing some action on special teams, getting back in the game there. But there's a lot of backs, and I think it's hard for Estime, but if he has a poor game, a poor outing, isn't getting the contribution he needs to, if you're Notre Dame, you have to start playing some of these other backs and giving them some snaps.
And I think that's what they did. And I want to point to, Jeremiah Love ended up being the leading rusher. And we saw great things from him. But the other thing that I would say that it's important as an offense to recognize is that we have different backs with different skill sets. Estime is your power back. He's, it's third quarter, you're up by a little, defensive front's tired, you're running it down the middle with him, right? Jeremiah Love is your more elusive back. Get him in an open field, he's hard to bring down. And that's the kind of, balance that the offense was missing. It was running the same plays with every single back. And obviously the results, well, they spoke for themselves.
We have a lot more analysis on the other side of this break. You're listening to the ShamTalk.
You're listening to the ShamTalk Podcast, the #1 Notre Dame athletics podcast in the world. We appreciate your support, and we're constantly looking for ways to improve the listener experience. In order to do that, we need your help. We have a pretty cool relationship with Amazon.com, and we'd like to invite you to join us. Amazon recently sent us a special link. When you use this link to buy something from Amazon, we receive a small percentage of the order. Best of all, it costs nothing extra for you. The link is available on the screen and in the description below. Once again, before you head to Amazon, start with our link. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it helps us provide you with the best possible listener experience. Thanks for your support, and let's send it back to the guys.
And welcome back, and a big thank you to our friends at Amazon. Just a reminder, before you buy anything at Amazon, use our link first. Costs you nothing extra, and really, really appreciated by our team here. Brett, we got to talk a little bit more about Marcus Freeman. The press conferences this week have been interesting, and it was really interesting that Freeman said, I have no issues with the play calling. I have issues with the execution. He's a great guy. His staff loves him. His team loves him. But there seems to be some obvious issues here with the play calling, with what his staff did, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and, you would never expect a guy like Marcus Freeman to come out and throw his offensive coordinator under the bus. That's just not something that you would expect from him. So I don't think, we should be shocked by it. And again, execution wasn't there as well. That's not to say that he's incorrect, that, the plays were executed perfectly, because they weren't. But to say that there's no issue with the play calling, now that's another story that we have to get into. At the end of the day, as I've said before, the offense has become stale and predictable. And a stale and predictable offense is very easy to shut down.
It's interesting that maybe he didn't take some more responsibility for this specifically. In his initial press conference at Louisville in the locker room, he did take that responsibility. But looking back, maybe he has to weigh the decision, especially going for it on that 4th down with a huge field to go. Interesting take there. I think when the media looks at it, when I look at this, I see a head coach that's out of tune with reality. Others might see a head coach that really supports his staff.
I think you have to look at it as he supports his staff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you'd go back, if you were to get him off of the air and you would ask him 4th and 11, would you go for it? He'd tell you no.
Yeah.
I think at this point he would go back and say that's a coaching mistake that I've made as a second-year head coach that I can learn from. And that's something that we have to keep in mind, that Marcus Freeman, he's a defensive mind, and he's only a second-year head coach. And it's something that you're going to have to be patient with. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, Gerard Parker has not been incredibly impressive with his play calling, and I will admit that. But, there could be some issues with the execution.
I would be shocked if Parker is with the Irish at the start of next year. Again, not my thing, not my prediction. I wish the best for the guy, but I do not expect him to get another chance next year. I think when the open market is opened up, he was the last-second hire after Reese went. He's had a struggling year. Notre Dame didn't meet high expectations. Mm-hmm. We'll have to see what it looks like there. And
here's what's interesting on that. So when Tommy Reese leaves, right, you have a second-year head coach in Marcus Freeman who's a defensive mind. Yeah. And I know there was talk about going after Utah's offensive coordinator.
Ludwig.
Experienced, knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
When you're the AD, when you're Jack Swarbrick, and you're looking at this, would you not want to surround your young head coach with a bright offensive mind to sort of ease the pressure off of him managing the whole team. If you have a solid OC who's proven, who knows who knows a thing or two about organizing a high-powered offense, would you not want to bring that in for your second-year head coach?
I completely agree. You have to. And you look at Parker, what has this guy done? He was an offensive coordinator for 1 year at West Virginia and then got demoted and then got hired by Notre Dame as a position coach at tight ends. And then to get that promotion randomly, no, he is a guy with not a lot of experience, and we have to admit that. I think going forward, you will see, as Pete Pavakwa takes the helm, encouragement to go out and get guys like Al Golden, a former NFL position coach, a former head coach at a major school. Obviously, he coached at Miami. I think that's what you're going to see going forward, is guys with experience to lead the Irish.
Yeah, and it's nothing against Gerard Parker. Obviously, Notre Dame has become tight end U in the past couple of years, and that's due in part of his work in the position game. But I would say when you're dealing with an inexperienced head coach who needs to learn how to grow, maybe you invest on that offensive coordinator, and it'll pay in the future. Because, Ludwig's not going to stay for, 10 years.
No.
Most likely he'll be here for 2-3 seasons. If the offense is good, he gets a job elsewhere and he leaves, which gives you the opportunity to then, after, Gerard Parker's been a tight end coach, if he stays for that long, then you can promote him after he's seen how the offense works and what's the system that they like to play with.
Let's touch a little bit more on Freeman, because if we're being honest, this year's season is over. Can the Irish win a New Year's Six game? Sure, they can. And it would be the first time they've done that in a long time. But at the same time, 2 years, no playoffs. Now, I don't think the expectation for Notre Dame is to go to the playoffs every year. I don't think the expectation for Notre Dame is to win the playoffs consistently. But I think there is an expectation Notre Dame should be competing for the playoffs through the extent of the regular season. And during the past 2 years, before fall break, Notre Dame has been out of contention twice. Last year, two dumb losses against Marshall and Stanford, unranked teams. This year, another dumb loss against Louisville. Going forward, the next 2 years of 12-team playoffs. In my opinion, Freeman has to make it one of those years to save his job. And I think, in a sense, he is on the hot seat, given the high expectations the media, Pavakwa, Father Jenkins, Jack Swarbrick had for this team going in.
I would agree with that. I would say when you look at the expectations for a program like Notre Dame, obviously, on the side, I'm a huge Vanderbilt Commodores guy.
Of course.
The expectation...
Best to Coach Lee.
Oh, yeah. the expectation for a program like Vanderbilt is not the expectation for a program like Notre Dame.
To make a bowl. Get 6
wins
and make a bowl.
Get 6 wins, make a bowl.
Yep.
For a team like, let's say, Georgia or Alabama, it's win the damn thing.
Yep.
But for a team like Notre Dame, I would put us right underneath that echelon of Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State right now. I would say almost with, let's say, Oklahoma, whose goal is to make the playoffs. Texas, to make the playoffs, right? And that's something that, you should try to do year in, year out. But it's something that should be a consistent season-long effort.
Yes.
Now, this is 2 years in a row that the Irish have been basically eliminated by the last weekend of September.
Well, I think if the Irish had losses to Ohio State and USC, would it be disappointing? Yeah, but it'd be a different story.
Exactly.
Last year, if the Irish had losses to Ohio State and Clemson, it'd be a different story. But losses to Ohio State, Stanford, and Marshall.
And it comes into, again, who you lose to and what kind of loss it is.
Yeah.
Because obviously we can sit here and say if Marcus Freeman and the Irish were able to beat Ohio State, we would be having a different discussion right now. We would say, oh, maybe the Louisville game was just a flop. Maybe it is what it is. Seems like that happens. Maybe it's growing pains for the new head coach. And I think we dismissed Marshall and Stanford as growing pains last year. And Louisville's a good football team. They were a top 25 team when we played them. I think they're 13 in the polls now, if I'm correct. I could see them winning the ACC, right? That's a good team. That being said, you don't want 2 losses this early, and especially, in my opinion, the most heartbreaking is the way in which Notre Dame lost those games. Ohio State, there was a very clear way to win that game at the end. You get the ball, you have 3 minutes back, all you have to do is rush the clock out and you win. Yeah. That's it. And, you look at a game like Louisville, the team seemed flat, not ready to play.
I think the thing you have to consider for the Irish, too, is that they've been winning these games, especially the ACC games. 30 straight wins against the ACC in the regular season going into this game. This breaks a streak. So they've been winning these games recently in the ACC. But ACC looks good, and you have to reconsider, is a scheduling agreement going to be beneficial down the road when you have these teams randomly like Duke and Louisville who you have no clue if they're going to be good. And Notre Dame in the future is only going to play Clemson every 3 years, right? Maybe every 2 years, but essentially once or twice during a five-year span. That's a tough schedule, and going forward, I don't know how you balance that, but you're going to be expected to get the easy wins so that you can beat the big teams. Like next year when you go to College Station and play Texas A&M, you need to have that be your okay loss, win out the rest of the season, and you can be in contention.
We play Florida State at home, though. That's another big game that you got to think about.
I completely agree, but I think Florida State has a lot of turnover next year. I think, going down to College Station, that's hard.
It's a tough game. But going back to the idea of the expectation to make the playoffs every year, I think it's not something to make every year, but it should be competitive, and that's, dare I say, been a letdown these past 2 seasons. Obviously, last year, we can chart it to growing pains. The team still went 8-4 and won a bowl game, right? But this year, expectations were pretty high. We had a tough schedule. We were looking at the best quarterback that this school has had in well over a decade. And you play 3 ranked opponents, and you've only won 1, and that was a squeak out win in Durham against Duke 2 weeks ago. So I would think for Marcus Freeman, going back and circling back to the idea of is the seat getting a little warm? And I think you'd have to see how the rest of the season goes.
Agreed. Yeah, no, if there's 2 more losses, even more warm. Yeah.
If it's a loss to USC, a loss to Clemson, and then, a win against Wake and a win against Pitt, it's a pretty...
Stanford in there.
And Stanford, sure. Let's say a win against Stanford. That's a pretty... Seat's getting warm because that means that every team that you played that was, a competitive game, sort of.
Maybe. Okay.
Right? Was a loss, with the exception of Duke.
With the exception of Duke, yeah.
Right? And even then, that Duke game, 1 or 2 things don't go our way, that's a loss as well.
No, we should have lost Duke. It came down to magic at the last second and Duke not filling the middle of the field. If Duke fills the middle of the field as they should have, we lose that game.
And that's I think just what it comes down to is you need to see how the season progresses. But if we have more of these ranked matchups and losses accumulate, then the seat's going to get a little warm because the Notre Dame fan base, the school, expects a lot from the team. This isn't a Vanderbilt where it's win 6 games. It's not even, let's say a Penn State where it's let's win the conference. Mm-hmm. It's go to the playoffs and try to win a national championship.
Let's take a look around college football. We got a lot of teams that look pretty good, but I don't think we have a lot of teams that look great, if any. I personally don't think there's any great teams in college football this year. And Tim Brando, the longtime announcer now over at Fox, had a pretty interesting tweet. Definitely encourage you to go read it. He says that this year would be the ideal time for a 12-team playoff because he believes, you have a lot of these good teams, not a lot of them being great. But I don't know. Do you think that this year would be a good year for the 12?
I've always been in favor of expanding the college football playoffs, and put simply, just going back to the 4-team system, one of those games is almost always a blowout.
Yeah.
Right? Last year it turned out the final was a blowout, but the year before that, the semifinals, they're always blowouts.
Yep.
So, in my opinion, expanding it to 12 teams, you get teams that aren't 1, 2, 3, 4 that can play each other, and those games are pretty competitive. But going to this year, this would be a perfect year for the 12-team playoff. I'm in complete agreement with that.
It's interesting because Notre Dame would be in contention for a 12-team playoff. You will be able to have two lost teams in there. Now,
Yes.
It may be a 2-loss team that loses its conference championship game, so that might be a little bit different. But yeah, Notre Dame's season wouldn't be over. But I'm such a fan of the 4-team playoff. I think we should keep it. I agree with you that the end result, doesn't always look great. But I don't think that's the ultimate goal because I think with the current 4-team playoff, every game matters. As our good friend Keaton Bagenstow says, for Notre Dame and really for every team, every game in college football is a playoff game. In no other league is that the case. MLB, absolutely not, 162. NFL, you got 17. Still, no, not the case. Every game matters every week for every single team, right? And that won't be the case next year. If you're unbeaten, sure, great. Top 4 teams get that bye. They don't need to play the first round. But it's not as important. and a loss won't mean as much. And I think right now we're so heartbroken, we're so mad, because the loss does mean a lot. It ends the season. And in a sense, I think feeling, it's back to the classic philosophical pleasure pill environment, feeling that sorrow, feeling the sadness, and having it be significant in contribution, I think means a lot. And I don't know what the regular season is going to look like next year in FBS.
That's a pretty deep analysis right there. And I would say, coming back to that idea of every game matters, that's true. Games will inevitably matter less when you can afford to drop one. An interesting point of contention here is, how do teams then change their schedules? Will they no longer schedule marquee out-of-conference games? Because if you lose a game, doesn't really, that doesn't help you, but it doesn't hurt you if you. It doesn't help you if you win it. It doesn't hurt you if you lose. So will that encourage, rivalries to come back?
That's interesting. JJ and I have been talking about that. My initial view was teams should ease up their schedule because strength of schedule won't really matter. If they have one loss, they'll get it anyways, probably. But then, JJ was bringing up the point that, teams, they can get rewarded for losses. Strength of schedule might become more important. Or for a program like Notre Dame, sure, we'll schedule Ohio State. We'll probably lose. We'll make a lot of money. It's okay. And money's at the center of everything. But now it's even more money because you can lose and still it makes a lot of sense for your program. You sell a lot of expensive tickets.
Yeah, I would say for a team like Notre Dame, even in the 12-team playoff, every game matters more than your next team. And that's simply because Notre Dame doesn't have that conference championship. So we don't have that, we can, lose our last game of the season, go in, win the conference championship, or even keep it close, and then we'll move up a bit. That doesn't happen for us. Season ends the week after Thanksgiving, and then it's wait and see what happens.
Yep.
So, but circling back, I am a big fan of the 12-team playoff.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about conference championship game because now you're going to have four conference championship games instead of 5. So does the conference championship mean more? I would say so, but at the same time it means less as, you don't have that 5th team. The Pac doesn't have that internal representation. And before people say, we still have the Pac-2, the new Mountain West, the American Conference. No, that doesn't matter. I know we'll have a group of 5 team get in the playoff, but still, what the future of this conference championship game looks like, who knows?
I would say that going back to conference championships, it's more now. The conference championship means more. You're going to look into it, and the winner of your conference, the winner of your Super SEC, your Super Big Ten, your new Big 12, or hopefully the ACC is still around. It's another worrying thought. Your winner is going to be that clear bye team, and it's going to put, I would say, more weight to get that week off.
So that's interesting. With the recent changes, the College Football Playoff Committee hasn't announced the details of what this new 12-team format will look like. You're in favor of having the 4 Power 5 conference champions automatically get those first 4 spots and get the bye? That would be interesting. I might support that.
I would say, obviously Notre Dame is an independent, so we would like that to not be the case. But when you look at how it's gone in years past, that's always how it's been, that the highest-ranked teams will have a conference championship.
Okay.
And that's what really has been precluding Notre Dame from being, a higher seed in the college football playoff, higher than, I think, our highest was 4.
Well, I think it makes that game more interesting. It's kind of like, whoever wins the conference tournament in basketball automatically gets into the tournament. And, if you say, whoever wins this conference championship game among the top 4 conferences automatically gets a top 4 seed, especially, a team, you have imagine in the ACC, you only have one good team. So imagine your good team is Florida State, and the next best team is Duke. And Duke upsets Florida State randomly, is now number 4 in the college football playoff. Would it be nuts? Yeah, but that would be
it would be a lot of fun
thing. Agreed.
Right? Because look at it this way. If you remember just 2 short years ago, the NFC, or maybe it was the NFC East, right, in the NFL, had a 7-9 team, the Washington Commanders, back then the football team, host a playoff game. And I think that's great.
I think it might not be fair, but
it's not fair.
Yeah.
But it's kind of great because it means that if you're playing for the conference championship in the current format, right? Let's say this year, I don't know, we'll look at the Big Ten, for example, right? Let's say Purdue gets in there and they have 3 or 4 losses already. They win the conference, great, but that's it. The season ends whether or not they win that game or not.
Yeah.
They're not making the playoffs. But then if you change it, all of a sudden, 6 or 7, 8-win Purdue is now hosting a playoff game.
Well, let's be fair. There haven't been a lot of upsets in that game. Could there be? Sure. Could there be? There definitely could be. But it would be interesting to look ahead and see what that looks like for next year with the expansion. Let's look ahead at USC. We'll just touch on it briefly. For further coverage, take a look at the Observer's Irish Insider, available on the website ndsmcobserver.com, as well as NDTV's full preview show about USC featuring Jake Irons, JJ Post, Ben Bailey. That will be available on our YouTube page, Notre Dame Television, on Friday night. But, Brett, this is going to be a rainy game, a lot of wind. Caleb Williams is coming in. Will he have the fingernail painting about Notre Dame again this year? Who knows? But does USC, how are they going to play in this environment?
Well, I think the question shouldn't be how the offense is going to look, because we know how the offense is going to look. It's going to look electric, high-powered, and very motivated. The big question, my big question mark, is how is this defense going to look? You know, they haven't looked like a solid unit. In fact, a lot of pundits have been saying that the only reason why USC is fringe playoff is simply because their defense is not up to the task.
I mean, they have a decent secondary, some possible All-Americans in the secondary, especially at safety. But I agree, it's a defense that's been volatile. It's a defense that's struggled against inferior teams, having to go to several overtimes last week against Arizona. At Colorado, put up a lot of points.
And what it is this defense seems to be keeping other teams in the game.
Yeah.
And for a team like Notre Dame, whose offense may be a little slow to get started, this is what you want to see.
It's what you want to see, and you want to force USC as much as possible to run the ball on offense. Their strength is to pass and to have Caleb Williams scramble. I'm sure he still will scramble in the rain and stuff, but taking away threats, that can be meaningful. And if Notre Dame can get a good game out of Estime, get some stuff out of Price, out of Payne, and just run the ball, play it conservative, but play it creative conservative, and use the weather to their advantage, it could be a meaningful game. What you got for the score?
I'm going, you know what they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different event. I'm going to be insane here. I got Notre Dame winning 45-38.
No, it's interesting. USC practices mostly outside. People say, oh, they're a Southern California team. Don't give them too much credit. They're not going to be able to succeed up here in the Midwest in the Big Ten. Well, they practice mostly outside, and as nice as Southern California is, they do get rain days. USC is a very, very small indoor practice field facility, like 3/4 of a 30-yard field. So they do get some experience playing outside. I think they're going to be able to withstand the weather. I think Caleb Williams is too much of a threat for the Irish. He's going to be able to scramble. I'm going 27-14 USC. Maybe I'm too much of a it's going to be
Louisville's got you down. Louisville's got you down.
Louisville indeed does have me down.
I think that this is a big game for Notre Dame. This is really going to set the tone not only for the rest of the season, but quite possibly the rest of Marcus Freeman's tenure as Notre Dame head coach. How do you bounce back after a loss against Louisville like that? How do you bounce back? Your back was against the wall. You're eliminated from playoff contention at this point. How do you respond? Do you throw in the towel and say, it's all right, we'll go for next year, I'll get better recruits? Or do you say, no, there's still a lot of fight left in this group. We're going to go out and we're going to show the world what we can do?
That's the big question, and that's all from us here on this Tuesday night. We want to thank you for listening. For Brett and myself, you're listening to the ShamTalk Podcast. Have a great rest of the week. We wish our best of luck to the Irish.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with ShamTalk and get all our behind-the-scenes content, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Notre Dame Television. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and go Irish!